Recording in progress.
All right, I'd like to call to order the April 15th regular meeting of the Village Board at 7:37. Trustee Baldoff is in transit and may be attempting to join us virtually. President McCaig is remote, so I'll be chairing in her stead. Has this meeting been publicly noticed according to law?
The meeting has been properly noticed and posted according to law.
Okay. The first order of business is a special order of business, the EDI strategic plan presentation by Dr. Deborah Blanks.
Hello, it's good to see all of you again. A little bittersweet for me because I've been coming to you and working on this for 2 years now, and it's coming to a close. But I want to make sure that you feel confident about the work that we've been doing. And before I really get into the meat of this, just want to thank everyone from the board, the staff, community residents. Many people have contributed to this, and I appreciate it.
That make it easier?
It would make it a little easier, but I can adapt, so.
Deborah, just let me know when you'd like me to share my screen with your
Okay,
presentation.
So we can go ahead and start. All righty. So I'm here primarily to present the DEI strategic plan, and I'll talk a bit about the resource guide. When we look at the next slide, I would say that centuries ago when I was in high school, one of my favorite authors was Henry David Thoreau, and I apologize for his gendering language, but he basically said if a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away. That rang a bell for me as I worked on the strategic plan because Shorewood is doing something different. Not every village, not every community sees DEI as important. You take a risk when you focus on this. And so you really are in your own way listening to a distant drummer. And hopefully that drummer will become more and more clear and in focus and present. You started this journey before Cairo, my organization, became involved. And so the next slide really acknowledges that. Just some of the past DEI work that you've done dealt with the EDI committee, the Human Relations Committee. You adopted an equity framework. You had community development forums and much, much more. When Cairo came in, what we contributed to this process is an environmental scan, a work plan, strategic plan, and resource guide. The next slide really talks about briefly the fact that your past work and the work of Cairo was united in some ways because you took the initiative to adopt the racial equity framework. And while this is is generally framed on Milwaukee counties, you've worked to make it your own. And so we've used this in our work at Cairo as a guiding point as well. When we look at the next slide, it's not just a bunch of words. It's the findings that we identified in the environmental scan over a year ago. And so the highlighted words really talk about some of the key points. And those would be clear vision, mission, and expected outcomes, a more strategic learning approach, a workplace that would provide for an inclusive culture, a village that needed to focus on equitable internal operations, including hiring, contracting, and purchasing, a police department that could continue to improve relationships with communities of color. The findings also talked about the need to use data collection to enhance the measurement of strategic plan goals, the idea of continuing to address structural or systemic barriers, those such as housing, development, traffic, zoning, and others. The need for the village to recognize the value of collaborating with organizations and communities of color. The fact that the village could maximize your achievement by participating with key partners such as Milwaukee County and GEAR. And the fact that the village must adopt a commitment to a sense of urgency and accountability. I recognize that government has its own rhythm, and that at times government, you, board, staff, and others can look at making incremental changes, gradual changes. But with that rhythm, there still needs to be urgency and accountability. If not, progress is slowed and complacency takes root. So in looking at the next slide, what I was reminded about as I reviewed these environmental scan findings is that the first one really talked about the board articulating a clear vision and mission. And you did that. Last year, we worked together in this room to develop the equity statement for the board. And it has the vision, it has the mission, and it has 6 values that you wanted to put into action. And so when you look at this, it's really about the village of Shorewood having a vision of a safe, fair, and inclusive community. It's about a mission where the village of Shorewood fosters a culture that recognizes equity and fairness and justice, that promotes access to opportunities, ensures unbiased outcomes, and really continues to work to eliminate systemic barriers. And then you can see the 4 values into action steps. These items laid a groundwork for the development of the strategic plan. Next slide. Now, I'm always looking for a way to better communicate the work I do. And some of you may remember that one point I was talking about the swamp of confusion that I was in. I'm not in that swamp now, thank heaven. But it has been a journey. I have to actually acknowledge President McCaig because in one of our conversations, she pointed me to the 6 conditions of systems change. And when I saw this, I recognized that this provided me a better, more concise and clear way to articulate and communicate what I look for when I'm looking at a system, at a village, as an organization. And so first is the structural change. And you'll see in the findings as well as in the strategic plan, a focus on policies, practices, and resource flows. How you direct your resources or allocate your resources really can impact equity. And then the next level is the relational change. And as you heard me read in the findings, there's a need for the village to better connect with communities and organizations of color. Not only because that's a positive, fair, equitable thing to do, but it also starts to shift the power dynamics that often hold systemic barriers in place. And then the last is the transformative change. And that change, they say 2 important things about this change. One is that you can't sustain the relational or structural change unless you have transformative change. But when you talk about transformative change, you're really talking about how people think, what they believe, what their biases are, how resistant and open they are to equity. And so this in many ways becomes the most difficult change to make. Those are the conditions that I looked at in making my analysis. So when we talk about plans and goals and strategies on the next slide, I'm going to briefly go through the 6 goals. I didn't include the actions, and there are plenty of actions and tactics to be used in implementing these goals and strategies. So the first goal is really provide organizational leadership to structure implementation of the strategic plan. And while this may sound like, well, when does she get to the heart of the matter? This is in part the heart of the matter, because without solid, grounded leadership, little can be done and little change will take place. So you've taken the time to develop an equity statement, and now it's the idea of how do you implement and integrate that statement into the fabric of what you do and what staff does. And so that is one of the first strategies, to integrate equity statement framework into the work of the Board of Trustees. And then second, to support the village's administration's use of structured process for plan implementation, meaning that your village manager and assistant manager now have to come up with a structure to implement these recommendations, these goals and strategies into the work plans of the department heads so they can implement it in their departments. Second goal, cultivate organizational commitment to values of DEI. Strategy 1, provide a diverse array of activities, which basically means more training needs to be done, and not just more training, but effective training. I think the village manager and others have a good sense of what has worked and what hasn't worked. I would say more has not worked than has worked in the way training takes place. And part of that is that it's good to be aware of the different learning styles. I can say I do good training, but if staff doesn't connect with my training, it's not of great value. And so there needs to be more attention. And my understanding is that Chris, through his work with human resources, is really paying a lot of attention to this. Strategy 2, incorporate DEI strategic plan information and process into existing communication channels and develop new channels. There's the village manager's memo, there's the Shorewood Today, there's communication channels you have. Those need to be more used better and more often to communicate about DEI. And then the third strategy is establish a culture of accountability for plan implementation. I'm a big believer that if individuals don't feel accountable, they often don't get the work done. There needs to be an incentive, and there also needs to be motivation and accountability. Then when we go to the next slide, we're talking about goal 3, which is ensure Village of Shorewood has an equitable and inclusive human resources system. While we don't want to identify percentages, there is a need to make sure that the workforce of the village reflects the residents of the village. And so strategy 1 talks about ensuring human resource system provides equitable employment opportunities. And then the second strategy, create a workplace environment that cultivates a sense of belonging and inclusion for all employees. Those are critical because while you can't guarantee that you can bring people of color into this system, you can guarantee that you provide access and opportunity for people to know about the opportunities and to compete for the opportunities. And then second, just because people of color might be brought into a system does not mean that they feel a sense of belonging or acceptance or feel psychologically safe. And if that's not created in an environment, it's very likely that either they will fail or they will leave. Goal 4, implement strategy to increase supplier diversity in village operations. These two strategies simply talk about creating a process to promote the participation of minority, disadvantaged, and women-owned businesses in both the contracting opportunities and the procurement process. The board has already passed a policy that encourages utilization of minority businesses. However, that policy has not been implemented. And more than likely, that process has not been implemented because staff have a lot on their plates, have many priorities, and don't know how to implement it. And so the resource guide provides some information about how to make that process happen. So if we quickly go back to goal 1, it talked about the board establishing a structure and the village manager establishing a structure. That's important because if you want staff to implement goal 4 and those strategies, then there has to be a structure where they put it in their work plan, the expectation is set, and they are held accountable. Moving to goal 5. Create and sustain community network to support village achievement of DEI outcome. There are 3 strategies here. One is simply utilize the fantastic community partners you already have, whether it's Shorewood Today, the BID district, the school district, and others. Utilize them, continue to utilize them. Second, maintain intergovernmental cooperation. That's with Milwaukee County, that's with the Government Alliance for Racial Equity at the national level, and others. And then the third, and I think this is the one that will be most challenging to the village, is create partnerships with diverse organizations and communities. Oftentimes, well-intentioned individuals don't realize the assets that people of color are and the communities of color, what we bring. We're often viewed as recipients of services or victims, but not as contributors and strong allies. And I think when Chris and I worked on bringing in more candidates for positions, we simply reached out to organizations that I was familiar with, and he has continued to do that. Now, I'm not going to say that that has resulted in many more candidates and I don't know if any have been hired. What I am saying, though, taking those steps, making those efforts over time will generate more applicants of color and hopefully successful applicants of color. The benefit to the organization is not that you simply can say our diversity has increased, but people with diverse perspectives, backgrounds, and opportunities contribute valuable things to organizations and increase their flexibility, adaptability, and decision-making. And then the sixth goal is really to ensure Village of Shorewood services demonstrate Village's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the strategy here is simply to reflect the board's equity statement in the Village's work in the community. So you've taken time to develop an equity statement that should be infused and embedded throughout the organization in the work that the police do, that the public works, that community development, that the Elections Commission, Human Resources, all of your departments. That's what should happen. So I'm going to just tell you about the resource guide briefly, and you can see on the next slide a list of the different things that are included in that resource guide. I've given you examples of strategic plans from other government entities. I've given you the listing of all the goals, strategies, and actions in this plan, but identified that you want to identify a start date, a leader for each strategy, you want to identify metrics, just a planning tool. Equity impact statements. In the strategic plan, I've identified the need for the board to ask for equity impact statements. I've given you 2 examples of those. Developing tactics. I've identified in the strategic plan goals, strategies, and actions. To implement actions, oftentimes there needs to be a development of tactics, so we've discussed that. The next 3, government partnerships, community partnerships, diverse media outlets. I've given you the names of several organizations so that when staff start wanting to create a minority business utilization plan, they have contacts that they can make that will help them, not just government entities that do this work, but specific offices that actually have certification lists so they don't have to duplicate those efforts. Educational resources include national resources as well as books, as well as videos, things that people can use as in a group or in individual learning, and then a glossary of terms. Now, the thing that I haven't included on this list that I did include in the resource guide that I'm sure at least one board member would be looking for is the list of key performance indicators and metrics. I felt very strongly, trustee, if I hadn't included that, you would be asking me about it.
I would be asking.
Yes, you're welcome. So when we look at accountability through KPIs and metrics, the KPIs are data that show you just how good you are at attaining your business goals. The metrics are lower level and track the status of your business processes. So I'm not going to go in depth about this, but you can see on this next slide a listing of some of what the KPIs can be. I realized in this process that I can't tell you how you should measure your work. I mean, I can give you suggestions, but I think you know better and staff knows better. So I've given suggestions and would fully expect that you and staff would accept some, eliminate others, create your own. For instance, just going through one, the village develops a structure that reflects equity in reporting, decision-making, and representation by 12/25. You know better than me what goes into that and what you would feel if that is a good key performance indicator or not. Moving to the next slide, accountability through metrics. The first one, 80% of reports to the board include an equity impact statement by 12/25. That might sound a bit mundane, but the idea here is that if staff or consultants or whoever might be providing a report to you would have to really think through what is the equity impact of what they're bringing to you. Again, these are suggested metrics. You and staff would be in a better position to develop the specifics. But what I would say, without KPIs and metrics, it's very likely that even if you do the heavy lifting of implementing the plan, you won't know if you've achieved what you really wanted to achieve. So that's why those are very important. And then I'll end on a different note. Ralph Ellison was a great Black author, and part of what he talked about is it takes a deep commitment to change and an even deeper commitment to grow. So you've done a lot of work. You're making changes, but the strategic plan, while it ends my commitment to you, it doesn't start your commitment, but hopefully it renews your commitment and gives you something tangible to use as you move forward. So I thank you for this opportunity. I hope, though, as we often say with our work at Cairo, I hope that the strategic plan and the resource guide don't just sit on a shelf. They were designed to be used and implemented, and hopefully to help this organization change and grow. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Blanks. And yeah, it's been quite a journey to get to where we are. You've certainly given us a lot to work with. So just on behalf of all of us, I just want to say we appreciate it. So thank you. And I guess one question I had, we can go around the room and hear from residents as well. Just building on what you said, I mean, you've given us a pretty clear plan with some, takeaways and recommendations. Just based on your experience, what are the challenges bodies like ours encounter when they try to implement something like this? What are the sort of things that we need to be thinking about, and where do people get stuck, I guess?
Well, I can think of three right off the top. And the first one is you have a lot going on. You have a lot in public works, some real major projects coming up. And so while I know where I would put this as a priority, realistically, you have to figure out where does this fit in your array of priorities that you already have undertaken. So prioritization would be one. Second would be, and one that I found often can torpedo good intentions, is resistance to change. Even people who advocate change find it difficult when they're having to give up something or perceive that by bringing diverse people into employment, that somehow they feel they're being threatened. So you're really going to have to deal with resistance of change. And that's why in the 6 conditions of systems change, they talk about mental modes. Are you preparing the staff to be ready for this change? And does the staff already feel like they're in a psychologically safe environment? Do they feel like their input is respected? Do they feel like they're going to be judged based on their contributions? Or do they feel like Deborah and others are pushing this strategic plan to push them out the way? So the more they feel safe and respected and valued, and the more they accept the training, the more likely they'll be less resistant to change. But that is often one of the keys. And then the third would be simply resources. As I gave the example about utilization of MBEs, you developed a policy, the process in the contracts, you can see DBE utilization mentioned. But unless staff feel like they have the resources or the contacts that help them learn what they don't know and help them be able to implement these strategies and actions, they will be inactive. And they may not do that because they're trying to resist. They may do that because often when we don't know how to do something, we put it on the back sheet. So giving staff the resources that they need is important.
Thank you. Just like to go around the room. Trustee Kudo.
I just want to say thank you. I know when we sat down at City Market, I talked your ear off about metrics and how, it was more a matter of, I think we all had a general understanding of what we're getting ourselves. An understanding of where we wanted to be, but none of us understood how to get there. At least none of us understood. And so I really appreciate the fact that there are steps, metrics that we can take that will have deliverables. So I know we were joking. I appreciate that it's in there. I think it's very helpful for us. Because again, like you said, you don't want to take this and then have us sort of put it down. These are steps, literally goals we can achieve as a community just by following the direction, really. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Go around the room. Yeah, thank you so much for all this work over the past couple of years. It's been truly, such a wonderful benefit to me personally, hearing from you and learning from you over the past couple of years. And so I'm extremely grateful for all of that. I'm extremely grateful for the plan. As I was looking through this, I think it gives a clear roadmap of what we need to do and how we can do things. I think, like you had mentioned, sometimes the trouble that we face here is there's so many mundane things happening all the time, that things can get lost in the shuffle. We would just prior to this has been half an hour talking about a stop sign, and I mean, that can take up so much time. And one area that I think we had talked about in the past was in hiring. And so I was grateful to hear that you had already worked with Assistant Manager Anderson about reaching out to different organizations for hiring, because I think that's one concrete area where there's always something changing. There's always turnover, that can always be on the front burner. So thank you. And I just really, it's been really, I'm very grateful and very appreciative of everything you've done, for us and for me personally. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'd like to thank you also very much for all the work that you've done. I have a couple of questions. One of them is related to vendors and things like that. And I'm just wondering, and maybe this would be obvious if I had read the document more closely, but when we go out for bids, is it becoming common practice now? So on the other side, when we get a motion put in front of us, it will say like a financial implication. That's a, so I understand. I think you're saying eventually we should get to the point where when a motion comes before us, there'll be a category that also said there's like an EDI component. Taking this sort of from a different angle though, when we go out for bids, when we put out an RFP, is that something we can put the onus on the vendors that would be responding to our bid question? And we say to them, or our municipalities now, government entities and private companies saying, when you give us your bid, also tell us how this promotes EDI.
Yeah.
Is working out.
When you talk specifically about construction or professional services even, oftentimes what jurisdictions do is exactly what you're talking about. They will put out maybe they're constructing a building. They will have a prime contractor and other contractors, and they will, in those RFPs or requests for proposals, identify, we want 15% MBE utilization on the plumbing contract or the electrical or whatever. But it's then up to the prime contractor, the main contractors that are bidding on that, to include an MBE. And so in that industry, minority businesses know that they may be contacted to fulfill that MBE requirement. Cairo Communications was contacted for a government project, and the prime talked to us about fulfilling a 17% MBE requirement. That is standard, and that was for a professional contract. So the good news is that most contractors in construction, and for the most part in professional services, already know because of their work with other, like with the county and city of Milwaukee, they're accustomed to this. Department of Transportation and some of the state departments have lists. The county has a list of certified businesses that primes regularly review to see who they might contact to be their minority business partner.
And perhaps I just showed my ignorance. Maybe staff can tell me right now, are we already doing that? I don't know. But okay, my second question is about training. I think training nationally has gone through some changes in the last few years, and some of the language has changed. Some of it's more focused on, as you're using language, as access. I'm just wondering, what does the training landscape, because it's a strong component here, key component, what does the landscape look like in terms of training for a group of our size, a municipality of our size, resources we have? I understand that it's a prioritization issue. And obviously this can be something though that can be national, right? So we can do a webinar, right? So it's not necessarily local, but tell me how you feel about training modules right now for a municipality like ours. Are we going to have a lot of choices for content and price?
Yes, but I think part of it starts with figuring out what you need. For instance, people have different views, and actually, I had a conversation with the village manager briefly about this today. We were talking about training, and what I was saying was that oftentimes jurisdictions may know somebody or heard about somebody and they say, oh, let's get them. But you don't always know what you're getting. And so I think it starts with the jurisdiction first identifying, what do you need? Everyone wants to do implicit bias and explicit bias. But is that, and so the difficulty is figuring out what you need. But once you do that, there are national trainers, there are local. I mean, it's hard. I don't know if I'm going to answer your question exactly, because there are national, local, there's all sorts of DEI training. The key is, and I'm not saying, I know my contract with you is over, but I'm more than willing to engage in a process of talking about what do you need and how to get you that. Because
I'm just thinking, for example, the YMCA, which I did. Maybe Arthur, did you do that with me? I can't remember. I know Rebecca had done it. I believe Tyler did it. And then suddenly I think it was gone. And there was a feeling that it was pretty effective. It was fairly engaged, I mean, fairly involved, but then suddenly it was gone.
Right. And some individuals that I talked to didn't connect with it. And part of the reason, not that it wasn't good, because I've heard great things for years about it, but people learn differently. So some people may feel very comfortable being in a group and discussing EDI issues. A lot of people would prefer not to. People of color, we tend to be ready and engaged in all of that to talk about it. But when you're in a diverse group, that can become threatening to others. So it's really figuring out, do you have an array of training opportunities? So for people who enjoy being in a group process, a learning process, that's wonderful. But do you have videos or books or one-on-one learning opportunities? Do you have small group learning opportunities where maybe you build a consortium? I know for sure there's a small group of staff here that would be willing and perhaps even interested in participating in small group work. So it's providing an array of training processes trying to vet those processes, not just based on name recognition, but what's the core of what they do? And what is the core of what this organization needs? My opinion is that sometimes individuals find it hard to connect with implicit bias, explicit bias, a lot of the diversity training, but if you make it more connected to the work that they do, if you introduce people of color into the process, because part of the issue is oftentimes folks in suburbs aren't used to professionals of color coming in and helping them move something forward. So for instance, if you contacted Milwaukee County, they have people in an office that deal with certification issues all the time. They can help educate and train based on the expertise they're providing. That's one way of providing training outside of a classroom.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I was elected in 2020, the George Floyd, murder, and, our community our community went through hell for a little while here. There was a protest that came through that was stopped, and there was a lot of anger. I was fortunate enough to be, on the street, and I heard so many people just, it was really hard. It was hard to hear, but it was also something that I took away, and it was very valuable, to hear, just the thoughts and what were people thinking, and to think that we didn't allow people to come through Shorewood. That was shocking to me. It made me really sad at the time. And I can remember, around that same time, we had a village-wide special meeting. We hosted a village-wide special meeting. I think 300 people or around several hundred people came onto this, and it was just, I want to say it was like very therapeutic. People talked, people expressed their anger, and I would say over my time on the board, we've done a lot of reconstruction of streets, we've done a lot of planning of zoning codes. There's a lot that we've done that's very hard work, but nothing nearly as hard as this. This has been the most challenging. I remember Sam Coleman saying that this is going to be some of the hardest work, and once you think you've gotten somewhere, it just gets harder and harder. And I've been able to, over my time here on the board, I've been able to see how hard it gets. This is an easy thing to talk about when it first comes up. We're all for this. We want to do this. But when we get down into the weeds, all of a sudden things come up, things get put on the back burner, and then it disappears. This work is very hard. And I want to say we're up for it, but I'm not quite sure, we are up for it as a board, or as a community, and I'm not sure people want to go this far, and that's kind of the sad thing, is it takes big events for people to rally around a subject like this, and then it just disappears right away. When money get involved, when your neighbors have to confront something that's difficult, people run away from this issue, and it's been kind of sad. And I think you're such a voice of reason. I wish everybody could come out and speak to you and listen to your thoughts. And I thought the way you've approached this here with our board is just been, has just been admirable. It's been fantastic work that you've done for us. And, I follow everybody here and thank you and appreciate everything that you've done to this community. I hope we keep you on as a consultant. I think that would make the most sense for our community, is to have somebody like you that's familiar, that's gone through our community with a fine-tooth comb, that understands kind of where we are right now. I would love to have you as that resource, and I hope that's something you would like to do and you would be open to, is being a consultant or being a resource to our village. I guess my question for you is, with all your work that you've done in the community, you have close ties to the community. Do you think we've made progress over the past several years?
I guess that proverbial yes and no.
That's a hard question.
No, I'm trying to compose myself, because I've actually dealt with an issue or two that were intentional or not discriminatory. And I don't think people realize the trauma that people experience. and how it makes it harder for them to focus on what is necessary. So I can speak to trauma, not just that I've experienced, but others have experienced it. I can speak to positives where I can see people really trying. But everything that you said from the very beginning, I connected with because it's hard work. It's hard work. Well-intentioned people make mistakes and it doesn't matter if you're a person of color or white individual, we all struggle with how to get to the point we want to be at. And so I think the yes part is that I see people in Shorewood trying. And that in itself needs to be applauded. I see government trying. Village manager here will readily admit that it's difficult, but she always comes back with a commitment. And so I think, yes, I've seen progress, but on the other side, quite frankly, I've seen resistance. And until, I believe that until this board really sends a signal to staff that this is critical, doesn't have to be high priority, but it has to be a critical priority, and says and starts really helping staff feel like they're valued and that their contribution to this issue is important, it's going to be difficult for government, the village as government, to make progress because you will have too many people scared to make the change or scared of what the change means for them. And so there's a lot of yeses and reasons to celebrate, and there's a lot of reasons to be concerned that this will become stagnant and the village will become complacent.
Yeah, change is difficult, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Again, really appreciate everything that you've brought to us here, and hope to continue using you as a resource for the village. And you know, even personally for myself, you know, I think you're just a fantastic human, and you know, thank you for what you've done for our community.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. President McKay.
Thank you. I don't think that I have much to add, but it's really great to hear all the engagement around this. And I also really have appreciated working with Dr. Blanks, and look forward to moving ahead as well.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from people in Village Hall or with us remotely? All right. Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
There's no action required on this. Staff will be reviewing the recommendations and provide an outline of next steps for implementation at a future date. Rebecca, any more detail you can share on that or what we should expect? Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Next item of business is consent agenda items. Sorry. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Or I'm sorry, any discussion?
I'd like to please pull item 5D as in Diane.
Okay. All right. Must approve the consent agenda with the exception of item D.
Aye.
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 All right, we got that done. All right. 6 items removed from the consent agenda. Item D. Trustee.
Thank you. I wanted to be clear on the intergovernmental agreement with law enforcement services, not having a background in legal contracts. From my reading of it, it looked like if we think we'll give maybe one officer a day for 4 days, if something happens to our officer while they're the contractor for the city, we are responsible for their medical care if they need. From my reading of the liability, is that for a workman's comp and everything? That would be our insurance for them would kick in. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, generally you hit on exactly what a lot of the municipal attorneys that were reviewing this for the counties that are assisting, hit on. There's a state statute that basically governs what happens in this situation. Because in the past, there's been litigation where, say, someone responds to a request for service assistance, in a local neighboring community, somebody goes over the border and then they're injured in the next, and then there's a huge lawsuit over who pays what. So generally, what it's going to come down to is your workers' compensation, unless it's specifically covered by the statute, they continue to basically be
Covered under our
Sure.
policies.
Yeah.
Okay, and the other question was the indemnification. So if another person, our officer is working, another person involved in whatever altercation is injured or sues, City of Milwaukee is indemnifying us. And so if that third party, is that, if I understand the liability to third parties on page 122, item number 12.
Yeah, that's generally clause 12, where it says the city, that's Milwaukee, shall indemnify the contractor, which is us. And then liability to third parties when assisting personnel are acting within the scope of their employment. There's always exceptions to the rule. If somebody does something that's so out of the scope of, their duties, then they have unusual circumstances, but generally
Generally speaking, if our officer's
that's the
injured,
case, yeah.
our insurance will cover it.
Yeah.
And if another party is involved, they're indemnifying.
Though they would indemnify us if there was a third party that sued and said,
Right,
I was
okay.
injured when you arrested me, or you put the cuffs on too tight and I broke my wrist or something along those lines. And then
Okay.
there's actually reference to 660313, which is a state statutory provision that talks about those, which also governs those types of situations. So
Okay,
there was a little bit of the massaging of the language that was done collectively, and so this is what everybody agreed to at the end of the day, and I'm comfortable with
okay,
with what
thank
it
you.
does. And it's generally also consistent with what happens when there's a request for service call.
Like a
assistance.
mutual aid.
Yeah, mutual aid, exactly.
I'm prepared to make a motion.
I just have,
Someone else.
sorry, I just have one quick question. Attorney Bear, I just want to make sure that it's clear to the officers that are serving that if they are injured, that there's a process to follow, right? There seems to be a lot of sort of legal back and forth between City of Milwaukee, the Village of Shore, potential insurance, liability. But from the officer's perspective, I just want to make sure that if they are injured, there's a very clear process for them to follow to
Yeah.
make sure that they have a continuation of care and all the things that they would.
Yeah, nothing will change for them. They won't be left out in the cold because, they won't be saying, oh, well, you're the responsibility of the requesting agency now, and the requesting agency saying you're the responsibility of your home agency. That's all laid out. So it should be seamless for them. If something happens, they make a claim as they otherwise would. As I understand it, the police union has taken a look at this too and asked their attorneys to look at it. And as I understood, they didn't have the issue.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Kudo, I can, Chief Forest here, I can assure you
Sorry,
that,
Chief, I didn't see you there.
as Attorney Bear said, the process for, and hopefully no injuries occur, but I can assure you that that process will be seamless and nothing will change internally for us.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I didn't see you call.
No worries. Thank you.
Do any other trustees have any questions? President McCaig? All right, seeing, hearing none.
I move to approve the intergovernmental agreement for law enforcement services for the 2024 Republican National Convention.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 All right, sounds like carries 6-0. There are no public hearings for the night. Citizens to be heard. Did we receive any notice of citizens to be heard? Doesn't look like it. Are there any citizens that would want to be heard this evening on non-agenda items? All right, seeing, hearing none, we'll move on to the next item of new business. Item A, consider the next steps for Capitol Drive pedestrian improvements. I'd just like to hand it over to the village manager to, outline her vision for what she's thinking here, for what's behind this proposal.
Sure. Within your packet is a memo, which explains the thought process after reviewing and, more importantly, listening to all of the people who are trying to productively move forward. And one of the elements that is clear from all parties after listening is that communication has been an issue. And that's something that I can assist with. As your village manager, you chart me with overseeing that 30,000 foot level in terms of projects that we're working on, and also reviewing work plans and how different elements can be slotted in or not at various particular times. So you'll see my steps of process improvement as that relates to volunteer committees moving forward. More importantly, we've identified and have done a significant amount of work this year with regards to Capitol Drive. And as you've read by the technical aspects in Director Bushlick's memorandum regarding some of the improvements, it really requires a public works lens to be at the table and actively present for those discussions. I'm recommending that at this point, the board refer this item for a formal initiative proposal with the Public Works Committee, which would also allow the opportunity to have others attend those meetings and participate at the same time. Many times what we see is that sometimes separated meetings don't allow for the most efficient communication to take place between groups. And the technical aspects that Public Works has been engaged with and familiar with, I think would be a helpful part of that discussion. They would work then on putting forth an initiative that would go through some of those technical aspects that Leanne reviews within the scope of her memo, and bring that forward to the board for consideration so that we're moving forward with all parties on the same page.
Thank you for that. I guess just from my vantage point, this makes sense to me just as a means of ensuring that we have the focused attention that we would need on this. Question I had, and proceed in a deliberate manner moving forward. A question I had, so I mean, there are other committees that have, an interest in this. I think it was a topic for parks and public spaces. Is there any, while I would see Public Works being, call it the funnel for ensuring, for seeing things through, would, other committees have opportunity to develop a point of view and share it with Public Works? I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of what this might look like in action if we were to move on it as it relates to the involvement of other groups.
Sure. I think that members of all other volunteer committees or just general members of the public are welcome to attend the Public Works Committee meetings and participate in that process. What has been communicated to me and from different perspectives is that sometimes when policy development occurs and recommendations occur without the perspective of also Public Works being involved, some of that information would be really helpful. So that we're not having the conversation twice. So the purpose of funneling and having those discussions occur in one meeting format is really to allow those people to engage and participate, funnel all communication through one avenue so that there can be reflection and also review of what questions are being asked so that we can most productively communicate and have that discussion and move forward with some thoughtful recommendations.
Okay, I'd like to go around the room then, starting with trustee Ursink.
No, I think, I think that makes perfect sense. There's, like you said, there's just been so many different avenues of communication, trying to go through just the different emails, the memos. I think that once we focus this a little bit more, I think we'll have a better idea of how to grasp this and move forward. So I appreciate the work coming ahead to the Department of Public Works.
Trustee Stokran?
Thank you. I guess I see two different issues here. I see the recommendation that we move this to Public Works, and then I also see changes coming to the committee structure or the way the committees function. And I guess I'm wondering if we should deal with that separately, or because I do see it as a big issue. I mean, let's just go back and for a little context here, we used to have a separate bike ped safety committee. And then I believe it was a staff recommendation to put that in one with parks and open spaces. And then we created the TARP policy, which residents used for this. And they also used the committee process. And now we're going to change somehow the committee chairs are supposed to now being requested to meet with the village staff quarterly to have ideas vetted before they go to the committees. The Parks and Public Spaces Committee meets every month, and if there is any concern about what they're doing, there's a staff member there. We already have a staff member there paid, and we also have minutes. And so I guess it was confusing to me and to some people on public spaces that staff Rebecca seemed confused with what was going on with Parks and Public Spaces. And I'm just going to read something from the chair of that committee. This is not voted on due to the time commitment here, the time element here, but she had a statement she would like me to read with input from other members, and I'll provide a copy for Carol to put into the minutes. The Parks and Public Spaces Committee is in favor of the village having a new and improved, in quotes, set of policies and processes relating to how Parks and Public Spaces Committee staff and the board can better work together and get things done. Many members of the committee have on multiple occasions over the last years requested such a set, so there is more clarity and less frustration as the committee performs its role. We would love to collaborate with staff and village board members interested in the drafting of such a quote-unquote new and improved set of policies and processes. Members of our committee have already started roughing out suggestions that could be included in such a new set, and we would love to share these with staff and the village board at a future date. Our hope is that if a new set is developed in a collaborative way, once adopted by the board, they will make it easier to work together toward our shared goal of a quote-unquote better and more wonderful Shorewood. So I'm prepared to support moving this to Public Works, but I have concerns about asking residents who are already volunteering their time to come and meet quarterly. I know it's a request to come and meet quarterly with the village manager to go over what the committee should talk about when we already have staff at those meetings every month. We staff conservation, we staff Parks and Public Spaces. Are those the only ones? So I have concerns about that. And if you want me to bring that up as an item for future consideration, I'm happy to do that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we're not agendaed for that, obviously, but no, that is a consideration. And thanks for raising that point. Any comment on any of that?
Yes, happy to. So the process that's outlined here isn't much different than what we currently do. The difference is having those quarterly touch points no differently than we already do. And to coordinate better communication with the board in terms of what is also going on with different committees through the update of the work plans. As we all know, our work plans are fluid, so they can some point change or pivot throughout the course of the year. And if there's one thing I've learned over the last quarter is that even those who I think may be well-informed in some of the village's large endeavors that are occurring in a calendar year, many people aren't aware. And so it provides an opportunity to provide two-way communication from the perspective that, here's what we have going on. Our staff has a desire to help and to participate and be productive. But at the same time, we also need to make sure that those plans are shifted and reviewed, and we can accommodate some of those requests. And if they can't be, then talk about how perhaps they could be in the future.
Okay, just want to make sure that if the committee wants to take up an item, if a resident comes to them, I mean, at the last Parks and Public Spaces Committee, someone came with an issue about Atwater Beach. So before they come to the committee, is the committee supposed to say, you need to meet with Rebecca? And if Rebecca says it's okay, then you can come to the committee. Because
No.
there's a, I can see there's like a power struggle tension here. And my concern is that we're cutting residents out. I mean, I remember finding out that the Strand study went to WISDOT before I got to read it, before anyone on the board, before anyone on Parks and Public Spaces got to read it. It was released on a Thursday, 90 pages. The state already had it, I believe. And then we were supposed to discuss it at a meeting on Monday. I was disappointed to learn that apparently staff and WISDOT met on March 19th. We did not hear a word of that. On the committee, the last Parks and Public Spaces Committee, nobody from staff told us that there was a meeting where all this was being discussed. Why was I not involved? Why was no one from Parks and Public Spaces invited? I mean, I hear collaboration. I don't see it. I hear efficiency. Efficiency was in the memo a lot. I didn't see the word collaboration or cooperation a lot.
We're getting a little far afield at this point.
And so
I
that's what is
appreciate
my
the point that
concern.
You've expressed yourself on that. And I do think the village, between the police staff and us here, have spent hundreds of hours and tens of thousands of dollars on this matter. And I think that we're all trying to move on this issue in, goodwill and with a desire to collaborate. And I'm not sure now is the time to debate timelines. But we did have a process in place.
To continue where we were originally, I think this is a great idea. I think this is what the village does best is when we collaborate with the community and staff and the board and the committees. I mean, I think we build a lot of great ideas from the ground up that way. So I think we've been working on this for a long time, and I'm glad to continue working on this. And I'm glad that this can come to Public Works Committee for us to really try to drive home the last remaining things on the list that we can do. Because I think it's just Capitol Drive is too important of a street. And I think we just need to stay focused and stay driven on that and, try to stay out of the weeds,
Trustee Kudo.
I think when I'm sort of watching and I was reading about in the agenda is it's like a good problem to have, right? I mean, we've got a ton of involvement from community members. We have a staff that obviously cares deeply about these issues. And 99% of the time, everyone's rowing in the same direction, right? 1% of the time, it feels like there's two ships passing in the night, and that happens. It happens everywhere, not just the village of Shorewood, all of our organizations, all of our companies. There's a sense, I think, from a lot of community members, and I think this is great, of sort of ownership over a lot of, right? Whether it's Capitol Drive or anything else, streetlight, anything else in the community. What I think we have to be cognizant of, though, is that there's a finite amount of time that everyone has on both sides, right? Whether it's staff taking incoming from committees and staff taking incoming from us, or just emails from the community, or if it's members of the community, right, who are trying to stay on top of stuff. And, there's a balance that we need to strike and then try to maintain of engagement, involvement. But ultimately, and I'm looking at Capitol Drive as a good example. Ultimately, we have to sort of let staff be staff in some ways. And we're heavily involved. We're part of mostly every conversation. We've had community members from this committee and others come before us and give us their opinions, and I've valued each and every one of them. But it's not always going to work perfectly, right? And not everyone's always going to feel like they're getting everything that they want. And I think we just, again, need to be cognizant of the fact that everyone is doing their best. And I think that, Trustee Arndorfer just sort of mentioned this. But these are pinch points, right? These are pinch points that all orgs have. This is one that we will continue to have between a lot of passionate people, some who, want things done, some who are trying to do the best they can to get everything done. So, I appreciate the process, as ugly as it sometimes is, or as lousy as it sometimes feels. We'll continue on. Like, we'll get better. We'll continue to grow. We'll try to, the next process we'll try to make better than the one we just did. But again, I think that, to the extent that we can, if folks could just, give a little grace everywhere, I think we'll probably be a little bit better for it. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of where I come down. I mean, I think staff are working their butts off. I think committee members are working their butts off to stay engaged and to provide, great ideas. Like I said, mostly it works. Sometimes it doesn't. This might be one of those sometimes where it hasn't worked perfectly. So grow from it and move on.
All right, President McCagg.
Nothing to add, but appreciate all the reflection points.
All right, would any members of the public in the room or virtually want to speak?
Sandy Pendleton has his hand raised.
All right, name and address, sir.
Pendleton, 3529 North Frederick. Hello from Idaho. I'm the chair of the village's pedestrian and bicycle safety subcommittee. I want to first start out by saying I agree with Kathy that there are really two issues here. One is the issue of how should we deal with Capitol Drive and that TAPR request from last summer as to Capitol Drive. And it's really important to understand that TAPR request didn't come from Parks and Public Spaces. It didn't come from Ped Bike Subcommittee. Didn't come from me. Didn't come from Greater Charlotte Bikers. Okay. It came from a group of concerned parents, right? So I think Rebecca Ewald's suggestion or proposal that this issue be moved to Public Works is an excellent suggestion. I fully support Rebecca's proposal on that. But there's another issue lurking, the second issue lurking in both the memo that Rebecca has provided on this issue and the memo that she's provided on 2075B, the ordinance 3057. And that's that she's proposing, well, or she's stating, we're going to have these new, better procedures. And that has to be addressed either at some future meetings or tonight. Please read Hannah Seeger's very polite statement to the board. There's a lot in there, and she is being restrained. I want to support everything that Hannah said in that statement. The current system, the current processes and procedures we have are not working well. They're broken, and I'd like, and I think, and Hannah especially says, we'd like to work with this board to have, and staff, to have a better system, processes and procedures, new and improved, if we can call it that. It's time for that. We've been seeing this for 2 or 3 years now, the level of frustration. So I hope that this becomes an item for future consideration. And that it is not because the board accepts Rebecca's proposal tonight about referring things to capital, that there's any understanding whatsoever that that means the board has approved Rebecca's proposal or statement that there's going to be these new procedures. These procedures were not developed collaboratively with the village board or with the Parks and Public Spaces Committee. That needs to be done if we're going to move ahead and have a better process here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right, with that, is there a motion?
So I move for the Public Works Committee to develop a 2025 initiative for Capitol Drive pedestrian improvements.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I'm wondering, why are we punting it for 2024? It's
There's a lot on the plate, a
early in.
lot going on in the village
I understand.
with Leanne. And if Leanne is asking for this to happen in 2025, got to respect that.
This is the problem with transferring it to public work.
I think that calling it punting is a mischaracterization, given that we've already done a number of things and have been working on a number of things. I think, you know, just to come back to my original point, I think what we need to do is get this on the train tracks, figuratively speaking, and just drive home the last remaining things as quickly as we can. And that's what I'm personally committed to doing on Public Works Committee, if that helps assure you that like this is the priority. So, you know, I think we just need to drive home the last remaining things.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that because it's ultimately going to come down to Public Works at any rate. So it might as well be part of that work stream from the get. And the trustees, you know, statement, we've already done a considerable amount of work based on the recommendations. And I think it would make sense to go about this thing in a measured approach, taking the wide range of feedback from a wide range of constituencies, as the resident noted. So there's just a lot here, and I think that it would make sense to proceed in that measure, noting that there are some, you know, the issue of the, you know, the mark that, you know, some of the street marking that failed will be addressed independently of this work stream. So I mean, that's one thing that was still on the plate that needed to be taken care of. But yeah, I have no issue with that. President McKeag.
Thank you. Yeah, as everyone's, I'm in support of the motion on the floor. I think procedurally, we accomplished what we could within the resources that we had available. And I think all the stakeholders have been very responsive and engaged. With the speed study, that was the last item that the board took action on. And it was our understanding that the remaining items on the TAPR request were probably not going to be approved by WSDOT. After the additional meeting with them and receiving their, kind of conflicting feedback, as the report, we realized that we're at the point with this TAPR request where it's technical, it involves different departments, and so it really is best to hold it for a time where we can align all those resources to make the best use of people's time and give it the attention that it needs. So I think again, kind of similar to what Trustee Kudo said, it's a good problem to have. We didn't think we'd get this far with WSDOT and with these larger decisions around the road. So for that reason, I'm in support of making an initiative so that we have the time and attention allocated.
All right, any other comment? Trustee
Yeah,
Stokbrand?
just for the record, it's my understanding that of the 13 items on the original TAPA request, we basically got the trees trimmed. We did we put up new rapid rectangular flashing beacons, but that merely brings us up to state standards. So basically, what has happened besides the speed study, which granted we didn't get to lower the speed so far, it did provide some important information, but the only other thing that happened was we trimmed the trees.
Any other comments? All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All
Aye.
opposed?
They,
Motion passes 5-1. All right, next item, consider ordinance 3057, an ordinance amending Village Code, Chapter 207, bicycles, motorbicycles, and other vehicles. Any questions for Rebecca on this item? Is there a motion?
I would make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
We have a
Okay.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Any comments or questions from people on the Zoom call or in the room? Seeing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor?
It's a roll call.
Is this a roll call vote? Okay, it's a roll call vote. It's a roll call vote.
Trustee Lynn,
Aye.
trustee Kudo,
Yes.
trustee Stokbrand,
aye.
president McKay,
Aye.
trustee Arndorfer,
Aye.
trustee Ursink.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
All right, next item, item C, consider waiver of purchasing policy and professional services agreement for the 2026 Lake Drive Lead Service Line Replacement Program. This item was deferred from our last meeting in the memo of village manager laid out some variety of options on how to proceed on this. Any questions for the village manager? Trustee Stokbrand.
I think it was the third option was to engage Strand to provide a bid. Is that, how would that work? So they would provide a competing bid to Kapoor's? And have we done this before with them or we've asked them to? Would this be part of their contract or would they charge us, put in a bid?
They would not charge us for developing a proposal or a bid for the work, but we would ask them to provide a quote similar as to before.
And so just for information, every municipality where the state has a contract for a road going through that municipality, is it expected then that that engineering firm that gets that contract with the state, that the municipality will forego the RFP process and just use the engineering of record for the state on that project? Because that's my understanding, that's what we're being asked to do.
My understanding is that we have attained a quote from Kapoor because they are currently doing the work on Lake Drive. And we were looking to have the private side work done, which is outside of the scope of the existing DOT contract. And because of their familiarity with the work in the project, they
Okay,
were
thank you.
requested to provide a quote.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so President McKay.
I was just going to say that I would support options 1, 3, or 4 as presented in the memo. If that's at all useful.
Okay, I'd like to make,
I was going to offer to make a motion.
yes.
I move that the staff be directed to seek another proposal from Strand Village Engineer, further guiding staff to review both proposals and make a recommendation to the village board.
Second. Any further discussion? Any questions from people on Zoom or in the room? All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 All right, motion passes 6-0. Next item looks like reports. Sorry, reports of village officials, starting with the village president.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay, well, it's pretty straightforward. ICC meeting, North Shore Fire Department meeting, both are linked in the packet. I will try to forward the ICC agendas in the future prior to the meetings in case people are interested in attending, but they aren't posted in time for our meetings. So it'll still be afterwards. And then we have a handful of proclamations, which I will defer to people in the room to deliver. This is Trustee Moore Baldoff's last meeting. And so I do thank her for her work and service and have enjoyed working with her. I'm sorry that she can't be here tonight. But I will defer all proclamations back to Trustee Arndorfer to either read or assign.
All right, the first proclamation is for Arbor Day. I'll pass that off to Trustee Ursink.
Sure. Thank you, Trustee Arndorfer. Okay, so proclamation. Whereas the village of Shorewood enjoys the reputation of beautiful tree-lined streets and wooded parks, and whereas trees are important to our environment by reducing soil erosion, moderating temperature, cleaning the air, producing oxygen, and providing wildlife habitat. And whereas the residents of the village of Shorewood have demonstrated a significant interest in the conservation and preservation of rare and historic trees, and whereas trees are a renewable resource, giving us paper and wood for homes, fuel for fire, and countless other wood products. And whereas the village of Shorewood has been designated as Tree City USA by the National Arbor Day Foundation, now therefore I, Ann McCullough McCaig, President of the village of Shorewood, do hereby proclaim Friday, April 26, 2022 as Arbor Day in Shorewood.
Thank you. The next proclamation is for the 55th Annual Municipal Clerks Week. Trustee Wynn.
Sure. Whereas the office of the municipal clerk, a time-honored and vital part of local government, exists throughout the world, and whereas the office of the municipal clerk is the oldest among public servants, and whereas the office of the municipal clerk provides the professional link between the citizens, the local governing bodies, and agencies of government at other levels, and whereas municipal clerks have pledged to be ever mindful of their neutrality and impartiality, rendering equal services to all, whereas the municipal clerk serves as the information center on functions of local government and community, whereas municipal clerks continually strive to improve the administration of the affairs of the office of the municipal clerk through participation in education programs, seminars, workshops, and the annual meetings of their state, provincial, county, and international professional organizations. Whereas it is most appropriate that we recognize the accomplishments of the office of the municipal clerk. Now, therefore, I, Ann McHague, President of the Village of Shorewood, do recognize the week of May 5th through 11th, 2024 as Municipal Clerks Week, and further extend appreciation to our municipal clerk and to all municipal clerks for the vital services they perform and their exemplary dedication to the communities they represent.
Thank you. And the next one is a proclamation for Melissa Moore Baldoff. And while she is not here, I'm highly confident she'd want her desk mate to deliver it. So
Actually,
Trustee Kudo.
Actually, messaged with Trustee Baldoff, and I'm hopeful that we can defer this to our next meeting when she can be here and get her round of applause in person. So if it's okay with
Second.
the chair and President McKeag, if we could just defer this
Absolutely. Thank
one
you.
meeting, I'd appreciate it.
All right.
And she would as well, I'm sure.
All right. Well, you might not be able to do it next time, but
That's, I mean, listen, these are the risks I take, it's okay.
all right.
Absolutely not.
Okay. All right, village trustees, guess I'll start. I was one of a cast of hundreds that have been, well, not hundreds, but more than one or two or three that have had the pleasure of going to the police academy. It's been a real educational experience. Weeks 1 and 2, it's been great to interact with the officers, in their space, learn more about the day-to-day and work they do every day for the village. So it's been a great opportunity with fellow board members as well as other leaders from across the village. That's mine. Trustee Stokebrand.
I just would like to thank staff for implementing the Zoom platform.
Couple things, actually just one thing. Wanted to give a quick update on library board. So we are in the final stages of the hiring process for the new library director. I want to say thank you to both Rebecca and Chris for helping the library board sort of find their way. The ad hoc committee that's been chaired by ex-trustee, current library board member, Patrick Linné, but yeah, I mean, it's been a really great process. There's been a lot of involvement, not only by library board members, but also village staff have stepped up to really help us and to help the board. And the Friends of Shorewood Library have been phenomenal. Even when they were going through their transition of leadership, it was seamless. They've been wonderful to work with. They were all part of the interview process. Dr. Blanks was part of the interview process for the new library board director. And so I think that it has gone exceptionally well. I'm not tipping my hand as to what's going to happen. You'll have to wait. But I'm very excited to get a new library board director in place in the near future and to continue the library's incredible service to not only our community, but Milwaukee County in general. So just wanted to give a quick update there. And to reiterate everything that Trustee Arndorfer said about the police academy. It's been super interesting to learn how they do what they do. So.
Any other reports from trustees? Reports from village manager.
Sad news, the beer garden will be closed, I think, for the next 24 hours because we have 2 very large oak trees that have some issues with them that are going to need to be taken down. So the good news is it's going to rain for the next 2 days. So hopefully, we'll be able to get the work done with those conditions, but that concludes my report.
Are you suggesting that all emergency beer garden operations should be moved to Hubbard, or pardon me, to Estabrook from Hubbard
Oh,
for the next 24 hours?
Tell me there's not a new tree disease, please,
No.
is affecting oaks.
no, it's a very large tree. It's really hard to get equipment back there with the heights that they need for some of the older.
Okay, I can breathe. Good.
All right. Next up, items for future consideration. Any items for future consideration? Trustee Stokebrand.
I would ask that the Business and Community Relations review the communication and prioritization process between staff and committees.
Can you be a little bit more specific before I second me taking that on? Or our committee taking that on?
Well, it's debatable. It's, you know, the memo today talked about a new procedure. Rebecca has said that there's nothing new. Based upon the memo, I'm going to say that it looks like there's changes coming to the committee process in terms of communication and prioritization. And I think we owe it to the people who are volunteering to review it and make sure that it's clear to them when they sign up to be on a committee what to expect.
Village
Just-
manager, any?
Point of clarification. So the process is the same. We go through an initiation or initiative process every year. What's different here is an enhanced level of communication. And that after listening to members of this board, members of the committee, staff, there has not been a clearinghouse or a 30,000-foot view, which is what I come to you all with, as we set our large initiatives each year together, to explain and have some level setting about those work plans and what can and can't happen from a staff level perspective at that time.
My concern is the residents' input. I mean, I don't think that chickens were in the work plan, but the chicken thing passed.
They actually,
Well,
well,
let's-
they were something that came through.
Right, I mean, beyond that, I mean, is there a current framework that exists, and might it be worth looking at that framework and evaluating how we want to update and articulate some of the points that were made in the memo?
The framework currently exists. It's what's outlined within the memo. The difference is an enhanced communication as a touch point with the chairs to make sure that they're getting information on how our work plans are developing throughout the course of the year, where they may see changes, whether or not it relates to their committee specifically or not. A lot of times when we work on different projects throughout the village, we don't have an appreciation, or I should say, different groups, when they're very focused on some issues, they don't necessarily know of how the projects that they work on may intersect with others or not.
Right.
There's also then the evaluation and looking at where the work plans are at. You know, at many times, you know, there was a point, you know, earlier in the year where someone had said, well, why don't we see these people at, you know, our meetings? It's not that they don't want to, it's not that all the staff members in the village don't want to attend specific meetings, but they need to, they're usually working on some things to clear the deck to then allow for space for next initiatives to come to fruition and to move on. So it's a balance between continuing with the work that we already have planned and then how to properly introduce. There also needs to be some enhanced communication on the end of department chairs. When they approach an issue, they're approaching it again from their vantage point and their service point. And many times we need to also sit back and reflect within the scope of that quarterly recalibration and have some discussion about how things will work and how we can provide opportunities to move things forward, or not, based upon how we can work together to do that work.
I mean, at risk for trying to read Trustee Kudo's mind, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for the committee to look at this and, you know, articulate a common sense approach that winds up having the approval of the board for how we handle, for just a vouchsafed approach, I guess I wouldn't characterize it as.
Could I just interject real quickly? I mean, I think before we just pile on another task to that committee that already has a lot going on, I mean, sounds like a quarterly plan. Should we at least see one quarter through before we ask the committee to do this? I mean, I would much rather be more thorough and specific with what we're asking this committee to look at, than just toss it to the committee when we haven't even gone through a single quarter of a quarterly plan. So that's just.
I'm not familiar that we have a lot on our plate.
So as the chair of the proposed committee, the location of this agenda item, you know, what I want to say is I have no problem. And again, this caveat to all this is that President McKay determines where all this goes. It's up to her where she wants to put this, if anywhere. But, you know, what I would be happy to discuss with committee members and members of the community is the process and how it will play out and how people will be affected by it. And then if they have any clarifying questions or anything like that, you know, we're happy to take those questions. We're happy to have some feedback from the community. What I don't want to do is sort of a laundry list of an airing of grievances with this process. If you have, you know, if members of the committee have suggestions that are germane to these operations, then fantastic. What I also don't want to do is I don't think that staff need to prepare anything for this meeting beyond what the procedure is, so that we can take a look at it and they can just be prepared to sort of explain it to us, walk us through it, and then answer any questions we might have. So what I'm hopeful for here is that we were able to have this conversation at committee level, but that there's no additional requirements of staff before we do this, that they come in, they explain it, we ask questions, community members ask questions, and, you know, we move on. This isn't an opportunity, from my perspective, for us to go in and sort of wholly change what the procedure is. If there are tweaks, sure, we can take a look at those. But again, I sort of would agree with Trustee Lynn. We don't know that it doesn't work. We don't know that it doesn't work well. But I also, you know, the community has a voice and they get to share it with us, and I appreciate that. So that's what I would say. That under those circumstances, I would be happy to look at it. But again, President McKay makes the determination, and she might have a different opinion.
Speaking of President McKay,
She has her hand up. There we go. I keep forgetting to look at the screen. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Trustee Kudo. That it sort of addresses part of what I was going to say. I appreciate that you're always willing to provide committee time where there's just more time to talk through things without anyway, that it's nice of you to offer that. I will say that it's surprising to me that there is resistance to getting more information from the village manager. That's the only thing that's changing here. We're adding in a touch point with the village manager, and it's surprising to me that that is of concern. But since it is of concern, I think it is good to use the committee space to talk that through. The initiative prioritization process that we do every May and June, that is not changing, and that's not up for review or reform. So just being clear about that. So whether or not, I don't believe we have a motion on the floor at this time, whether or not, if it is just offering community and business relations time, I, of course, would agenda that. If it is more of the vein of reviewing how we vote on initiatives and to set our agendas for the year, that is not something that I'll support at this time.
I believe Trustee Stokerman did make a motion, and we left off with Trustee Kudo wondering whether he was going to make a second or not.
I guess my second is predicated on whether or not the descriptions from President McKay and myself. Is that okay with you? Is that what you're planning? Is that what you want to do? Just have that.
I'll repeat the motion. I would like to move that the Business and Community Relations Committee be directed to review the communication and prioritization process between staff and committees.
That's not really an item for future consideration, though. I think that what agenda item 11 is for is I would move to place X agenda or X item on an agenda for the meeting in May, June, July, or August. It's not to actually have a debate on the underlying issue. It's to whether or not an agenda item will be placed on an upcoming meeting is generally And where communities have run into difficulty with this is if you run into a big discussion on the underlying issue. So the idea is generally, if it's a future consideration, it's move to place a specific agenda item at a future meeting. And then yes or no, if there's a second, and then you vote on it. To direct staff to do something, to direct the body to take action and do X, Y, and Z. That's not really an agenda item. That's actually a substantive motion, in my opinion. So I think the question is there something you want to see on a next upcoming meeting for the village board, and then make that?
Can we direct staff to put this on the agenda for the next CBR? Based on what you were saying.
Or do we have to make a request of the president to put it on?
You can make a motion. I mean, if there's enough people vote to put it on a specific agenda item on a specific meeting, then it'll be on. There's two ways you can get something on the agenda. There's the normal sort of collaborative process that, that the president gets together with staff and says, okay, there's the triage. What things do we have to pass based upon, state law and local ordinances? What work do we have to get done to sort of keep the lights on and the business of the village rolling? And then there's, hey, we have these other considerations. Can we work it into a meeting in May and June, July, whatever it might be? And, you can make that request and it will get put on. If someone thinks that there's something that's absolutely critical and it needs to come in a meeting, next meeting or the meeting after that, someone can make a motion under item 11. I move that we place on the agenda for May, whatever the first meeting in May is or second meeting in May, this specific agenda item. Is there a second for that? If there is, and then if the majority vote for that, that item will be on that agenda.
So that, as a point of clarification, that item has to go to general board agenda. You can't agenda. Can you agenda an item directly to a committee, or does it have to go to the board to get agenda'd?
Yeah, I think, well, it says future items of consideration. It doesn't specifically say board or subcommittees. And if you look in chapter 155 of the ordinances, the board is listed in there, all the subcommittees are listed in there. So I don't think it would be improper to say, I would move that JP&L, that a particular item be forwarded to JP&L for further discussion and consideration.
Okay.
Is there a second for that? Yes or no? And then you vote on it. But to get down too far down the rabbit hole and debate the merits of whether we do X, Y, and Z, the idea of item 11 is just, hey, I think that this is really, really important, and I'm formally moving to put it on an agenda as opposed to going through that normal informal process. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can make that motion. If there's a second and everybody agrees, it'll go on.
So can my motion stand?
I believe it can.
I mean, can you repeat it?
I move that the Business and Community Relations have an future item of consideration to review the communication and prioritization process between staff and committees.
So that's basically just saying we're asking that an item be placed on this committee's agenda. Yeah, that's fine.
I don't know. It's so vague. I'm just like, what is being said?
But I think
What?
it has to be vague.
Kathy, what are you upset about? I don't understand. I mean, we're asking for more clarification, and there's so much discussion about this, and when every time it comes back, it gets more and more vague. I just think it needs to be more specific. I can't support something that vague, that we just review how we communicate. I mean, that's a massive topic.
Yeah, I think what I would say is, and I heard you call the question, so I apologize. But I think what I would say is, my understanding is that Attorney Barrett is saying it has to be fairly vague. Otherwise it can't be super specific. And what happens is then the committee chair works with staff to agendize that individual committee meeting. So it starts off vague, and then
Then it becomes refined.
as we work with staff, or I work with President McKay on what we're actually going to discuss in that meeting is when it becomes more refined.
Okay.
I think that's my understanding of how this has to work. But I did mock trial in high school, so I'm basically an attorney.
Well, it doesn't necessarily, I mean, it could be specific. It could be,
Okay, well, I'm wrong.
you know, it could be,
Yeah.
I would like to agendize, or I would like to place on the next agenda, an agenda item to discuss and take possible action to entirely eliminate the JPNL subcommittee, just, you know, or whatever it might be. It could be very specific. But again, you know, there's two processes within which things can get on the agenda. It's that informal process where staff works with the president and then takes feedback from the board and does that triage and says, okay, here's what we can put on reasonably for this meeting and then that meeting and then going down the line. But again, if someone thinks that there's a pressing matter that needs to be moved to the forefront, they can make a formal motion under this that, you know, I move that, you know, the meeting in May, we specifically consider I have a discussion item, discussion item to talk about entirely restructuring subcommittee X or subcommittee Y or referrals to committees. And then if there's
Okay.
a second, it'll go on there. And if it's not, we'll go through the normal informal process.
So I will second the motion and then mirror trustee Ursing's motion to call the question.
All right. So we have a motion and a second. All right, any discussion?
See a hand raised on the Zoom.
Yes, Sandy Pendleton.
Very briefly, Sandy Pendleton, 3529 North Frederick Avenue. I support the proposal by trustee Stokebrand, and I appreciate her putting this forward tonight. I also appreciate Rebecca Ewald's impulse to have better communication and a better way of staff and communicating with the Parks and Public Spaces Committee. I think there's places for improvement in the way we communicate with each other and prioritize each other. And I very much, and I know Hannah does as well, very much look forward to working with staff and members of this board to come up with that new and improved set of procedures that I think will really eliminate a lot of frustration going forward and help us all reach our common goal. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions, discussion, things of that nature? All right, seeing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
All right, motion passes 5-1. All right, item 12, adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, in that flurry, I think I caught the motion from trustee Kudo, second from trustee Lynn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Meeting is adjourned at 9:25.